Hey everyone, welcome to the fourth Campfire Stories for Grown-Ups. Hard to believe I've been doing this for a month now. It feels pretty crazy. Um, as I said in my intro, this one is a little bit different from the previous three. It's not so spooky. It's actually a mostly true story from when I was a little kid that was, I guess, a defining memory or experience in my childhood and has always stood out to me. So I thought I would write about it and share it with you. I was planning to read to you from my lovely, exciting new backpacking tent today. I set it up in my back garden, but my neighbour has just started up his lawnmower and my kids have built a fort, so that's not going to happen. But we have a beautiful campfire behind us, beautiful lake scene, and I'm looking forward to reading you the story. So here goes. It's called The Magpie. The morning was cold, and Jess shivered in her blue-spotted dressing gown as the mist rolled off the distant mountains and across the glass surface of the lake below. The horses were beginning to stir, and she watched them fixedly as they tried out their first short, cantering steps of the morning, the dew glistening on their winter-thickened coats. She picked up her pencil and, tongue planted between her front teeth, began to draw. It was hard to explain, but when she drew, she went into the paper. It wasn't imaginary, like Dad said. She was actually inside what she was drawing, and time was different there. Everything was quiet and still, and her mind became slow. She loved being at the farm. Nana and Pop had had the place forever. At least, longer than Jess had been alive, and that was forever, wasn't it? They still had their city place because Jess's parents and the other aunts and uncles didn't like the farm and wouldn't come to visit very often. Jess, though, would plead to be allowed to go up, and so most Friday nights saw her crammed into the back of her grandparents' station wagon, wedged between overnight bags and the dogs and the copious amounts of food that Nana insisted on bringing. Her parents never seemed to mind. The old weatherboard house was run down and cold, but Nana always kept a huge fire going in the living room in winter, even at night time. The flocked wallpaper felt fuzzy and pleasant to touch, and Jess loved to walk down the creaky corridors, arms outstretched, feeling her fingertips tingling as she drew them across the felted fleur-de-lis. It would have been fancy and expensive once, that wallpaper. That's what Nana said. Now it was out of fashion, but no one seemed to care. The outer walls were once a lemony yellow, although they had peeled so much now that they were really more of a grey-brown. Pop kept saying he needed to paint the place, but somehow he never seemed to find the time. Jess thought he probably liked the peeling paint too. Around the house, like a misshapen skirt on a once grand lady, was the sagging, corrugated iron-roofed veranda. Under here, Jess and her cousins ate stolen shortbread biscuits, squealed as the rain fell deafeningly above them, played chasey and dared each other to pick up the brown frogs that gathered at the fence when puddles formed. They were allowed to ride the horses when Pop was with them, and the corral that he had built of rough-hewn wood was as much a home as anywhere Jess had ever been. She would be with the horses always, if she could. She loved leaning over the rails to watch Pop brush them, learning the special shh, shh sounds he would make to calm them, and seeing the way they responded by gently nuzzling his shoulder. Most days, he would let Jess lead the horses into the big paddock on her own, something the others weren't allowed to do, only telling her gruffly, "Remember to watch out for snakes. Those big browns are angry buggers. And don't forget to shut the gate." Gates were such a feature of days at the farm. The privilege of riding shotgun in the old ute came with the responsibility of opening and closing the paddock gates, something she would pretend to complain about each time. Gates were serious business, though. Always leave a gate how you found it. The paddocks themselves were fenced with tightly strained barbed wire, and Pop would shout at you if he saw you trying to sneak through the gaps. A broken fence meant injured animals and the neighbours' Herefords making themselves sick on stolen fruit from your orchard. On summer days, Jess and her cousins would rush through their chores so they could spend the afternoon by the lake. Once paddocks had been mucked out, wood chopped, chooks fed and verandas swept, they would throw on bathers and dance impatiently while Nana made futile attempts to slap sunscreen onto freckled noses and already pinked shoulders, before shaking out their boots to rid them of any lurking spiders and sprint for the water. Last one there's a rotten egg. The lake was wonderful. Your toes would sink, slurping into the brown mud in the shallows, and the older cousins would race through the gooey shore to dive lithely into the cool blue depths, tossing their red hair and laughing. One time, Billy told her there were water snakes in the lake that would swim into your bathing suit, and ever since then, even though it was nonsense and Billy was a stupid blockhead anyway, Jess would surreptitiously tug at her bathing suit under the water, making sure there was definitely no room for anything to squirm in. When it was just Jess at the farm, Pop would sometimes pull out the old tin fishing boat from the shed. He and Jess would spend the morning in silent companionship, digging for worms in the bottom paddock, and Jess would always hold up the especially fat long ones, which would make Pop grin with approval. They would drop their slowly squirming bait into an old paint tin, which Jess would carry to the muddy shore. Pop shouldered the fishing rods and the cooler, into which Nana would have packed a ham and cheese sandwich for each of them, a chocolate biscuit for Jess, and 2 beers for Pop. He had rigged a second-hand outboard motor to the stern, and with the 2 of them in the boat, it would tilt thrillingly backwards until the 2-stroke engine finally kicked in and the little tinny levelled out, along with its cargo. Together they would fly across the surface of the lake, the engine roaring in their ears, until they reached the dead trees that marked the place where the old village had been before the dam was built, and which Pop said always had the best fish. Most days they didn't catch much, but it didn't really matter. On the really good days, they would hook enough redfins to bring home, and Jess would watch as Pop scaled and gutted them on the veranda, ready to barbecue. "Nothing tastes better than food you've caught yourself," he would say. Today, though, it would be too cold for fishing. The grass around the house was white with frost, and Jess knew it would make a fantastic crunching sound if she walked on it. Her drawing was almost complete, and gradually she became aware of the sun filtering through the leaves of the enormous red gum on the other side of the orchard. Unseen, high in the tree, a magpie's warble announced the arrival of morning. It was Jess's favourite sound. She felt a shadow pass behind her and looked up to see Pop, dressed in his red, moth-eaten red woolen sweater, an ancient tweed hunter's hat on his head. It must be cold if Pop was wearing a hat, but he never mentioned these things. "What are you drawing, sunshine?" Jess silently held up her sketchbook to display the mountains, lake and horses that she had tried to render as faithfully as possible. Pop studied the drawing. "Geez, love," he finally said. "Quite an artist, aren't you?" Jess flushed with pride and embarrassment. Pop was not one to hand out compliments. He could always find a way that things could have been done better, and he didn't believe that kids should be mollycoddled. Nana called through the open door. "What are you 2 gabbing about out there in the cold? You'll catch your death. Come inside and have some porridge." As the sun worked its way out from behind the red gum, Jess felt the hot porridge make its way through her veins, and her cheeks, which had been pink from the morning's frost, glowed instead with the warmth of the milk and the eucalypt-scented flames of the fire. She began to feel pleasantly sleepy. Nana was talking about making a trip into town to do the grocery shopping, and through the fog of her drowsiness, Jess realised she wanted her to go along. Normally, she didn't mind going into town too much. The drive through the winding green hills and over the lake was beautiful, and took you past O'Connell's thoroughbred stud, where you could sometimes see the horses doing track work in the golden evening light. Sometimes, too, you'd see a mob of kangaroos if the time of day was right and you were really lucky. Today, though, she had her heart set on going mushroom picking with Pop, even though she hated mushrooms, and the thought of the bumpy drive in Nana's chemically clean-smelling station wagon was making her feel car-sick already. Even Nana dangling the carrot of a visit to the art supplies shop didn't hold its usual appeal. The town itself was a single high street, shaded by the iron verandas of the Gold Rush-era shop fronts, an effective architectural feature quickly developed by pale-skinned early settlers looking to shelter from the relentless summer heat. At the entrance to the town was the ubiquitous Rural War Memorial, a stone statue of a forever young soldier, equal parts hopeful and heartbroken as he stared unseeingly from under his slouch hat. So many dead young men from every one-horse town across this wide brown country. The far boundary was marked by the church and the obligatory country pub. The pub was the grandest building on the street, with its ornate iron latticework balcony and Victorian crown mouldings. Tuesdays were seniors' nights, and sometimes Nana and Pop would take Jess in for half-price fish and chips and lemonade. The pub still had a smaller second entrance, a discreet white wooden door with frosted glass and stencilled gold lettering which said, Ladies' Lounge. The supermarket was the only new building, and its construction had been a major event for the region. A squat cinder block warehouse tucked behind the pub, its gleaming shelves offered up long stretches of fluorescent lit conveniences, gaudy cereal boxes, canned soups, perfectly rectangular bread, to the glassy-eyed shoppers that roamed the aisles. Jess hated it. She was just beginning to protest at being dragged along on this chore when Pop held up his hand for silence. The three of them put down their spoons and listened. In the distance, Jess heard the cry of a bird that she wasn't familiar with. That was strange, because she could name nearly all of the birds at the farm by their calls. Cockatoos, willy wagtails, crimson rosellas, even the barking owls that would swoop noiselessly across the paddocks at night. With a start, she realised that she did know this bird. It was the magpie, but it wasn't the gentle babble that welcomed the day. It was a cry as ancient as the mountain tops. It pierced the sun-kissed windows of the kitchen, and even the crackling of the fire seemed to fall silent in deference. Wordlessly, but with an uncharacteristically quick stride, Pop opened the door to the veranda and stepped down onto the crisp, still white grass. Jess and Nana walked together to the large window, watching Pop head through the orchard towards the red gum, running now, his footprints forming a damp green trail behind him. They still couldn't see the bird, but its anguished cries echoed across the still morning. He turned back to the house, waving mutely, urgently. Jess and Nana hurried out onto the veranda, and Jess felt her heart rate quicken. Jess! Pop's voice was loud and clear across the bare and silent fruit trees. Nana placed a gentle hand on Jess's shoulder. She was still in her dressing gown, and its soft sleeve brushed Jess's cheek. No, love. I'll go. Jess watched the two strong, frail bodies confer at the other end of the orchard, the old man slightly stooped in his red jumper and tweed cap, his wife twisting her once lithe fingers as she nodded at his words that, from the house, were drowned out by the magpie's shriek. Nana hurried back, casting a quick, sympathetic glance at Jess as she stepped past her and into the house. I'm sorry, love. He's stuck on the fence. It's no good. She returned within moments, not stopping to talk this time, and Jess huddled on the veranda as the morning mist gave way to a brilliant blue winter sky. She watched Nana walk quickly, purposefully, between the barren peach and apple trees, in her fluffy pink gown, permed hair bouncing over the shotgun broken at the barrel over her shoulder, a pillowcase dangling from her free hand. Pop stood waiting by the barbed wire fence, his hand resting gently on the hopelessly entangled magpie's back, trying to calm its panicked flapping. The shot rang out through the orchard, across the lake, and echoed what felt like 1,000 times between the mountains and back to the veranda. Jess buried her head in her knees and wrapped her arms around her head, waiting for the tears that didn't come. She felt Pop's hand on her shoulder. His brown hands were weathered, the skin rough and calloused from a lifetime of work. His touch was gentle but firm. Up you get, sunshine. Those mushrooms aren't going to pick themselves. The end. I hope you liked that one. It was a little bit different. Thank you so much to Dan and Brett for helping me edit it. It was important to me to get that story right and to tell it in the right way, so I appreciate the help. I hope you guys liked it too. Have a lovely night. I'll see you soon. Bye!